"Lord, why us?" Clarence Washington whispered, his voice breaking under the Alabama rain. Clarence and Loretta, 75-year-old African-American pillars of their community, sat in their battered pickup truck, watching debt collectors strip their home of 50 years. Their three children, Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal, stood distant, clutching umbrellas, their faces cold as they pushed a nursing home pamphlet. "Crestwood's practical," Tyrone said, dismissing Shadow, their loyal 14-year-old Labrador. At an age meant for rest, they faced betrayal. Defiant, they drove with Shadow to Thorn's Rest, a forsaken mountain hollow. Under a blood-red sunset, the rotting cabin loomed. Roof collapsed, windows shattered, porch sagging like their broken hearts. Could this desolate ruin hold hope? Would Shadow lead them to salvation? Or would the mountain swallow their final stand? Their journey promises a fight for family, faith, and a dream reborn. The rain battered the windshield of the old pickup truck, each drop a hammer blow against Clarence Washington's heart. At 75, his hands, gnarled from decades tending gardens for Alabama's wealthy, gripped the steering wheel as if it could anchor him against the storm of betrayal. Beside him, Loretta, his wife of 50 years, sat rigid, her silver curls damp beneath a faded scarf. Her breath, shallow from high blood pressure, fogged the glass. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, pressed against her, his golden eyes wide with unease, sensing the fracture in their world. The couple's home, a modest brick house in a small Alabama town, stood behind them, its front door ajar as debt collectors hauled out the last remnants of their life. A chipped dining table, a rocking chair where Loretta once sang lullabies, a radio that played gospel on Sundays. Clarence's chest tightened, not from age but from the sting of his children's indifference. Tyrone, their eldest, stood under a sleek black umbrella, his tailored suit untouched by the rain. At 48, he was a financial director, his success built on the sacrifices of his parents' meager savings. Aisha, 45, clutched a leather satchel, her journalist's sharpness dulled by guilt she refused to show. Jamal, 42, the youngest, leaned against a luxury SUV, his engineer's precision masking old resentments. They had gathered not to comfort, but to deliver a verdict. Clarence's gaze lingered on them, searching for the children he'd raised with calloused hands and whispered prayers. He found only strangers. "We've arranged everything," Tyrone said, his voice clipped, professional, as he extended a glossy pamphlet for Crestwood Nursing Home. "It's got medical care, meals, safety. You can't keep living like this, Dad, Mom. You're 75. It's time." His eyes flicked to Shadow, curled protectively at Loretta's feet. "And the dog, he's too old. Crestwood doesn't allow pets." Loretta's hand, trembling but firm, rested on Shadow's head. "He's family," she said, her voice a fragile thread woven with defiance. Once she'd filled classrooms with the joy of music, teaching children to sing "Go Down Moses" with the fervor of their ancestors. Now her strength battled her failing body. "We gave you everything, our savings, our dreams, our home. You think we're too old to choose our family?" Tyrone's jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. "You're drowning in debt. The house is gone. Be realistic. You can't care for yourselves, let alone a dog." His words cut deeper than the rain, each syllable a reminder of the foreclosure notice that had shattered their world 6 weeks ago. They'd paid for Aisha's journalism degree, Jamal's first home, Tyrone's failing business ventures. Every sacrifice had chipped away at their security, leaving them with $1,000, a few canned goods, and Shadow. Aisha stepped forward, her face a mask of conflicted guilt. She'd once written an article criticizing her parents' outdated ways, a piece that stung Loretta's heart. "Mom, Dad, Crestwood has doctors for your blood pressure, your joints. It's what's best." Her voice faltered, betraying the shame she buried beneath her polished exterior. Jamal, silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. Years ago, Clarence had opposed his marriage, calling it impulsive. The rift had never healed, and Jamal's silence spoke louder than words. Clarence's eyes burned, not with tears, but with a fire kindled by decades of toil. "We sang 'Go Down Moses' in church to teach you strength," he said, his voice low, resonant, like the hymns of his youth. "We worked double shifts, skipped meals, sold our land to give you a chance in a world that didn't want us to win. And now, at 75, you tell us to give up Shadow? To sit in a sterile room and wait to die?" His words hung heavy, unanswered, as the rain drummed on. Aisha, avoiding his gaze, pressed a rusted key into his hand. "Grandpa Elijah's old place in Thorn's Rest, up in the Blackthorn Mountains. It's still there, barely. The air might help Mom's breathing." Her tone softened, but her eyes darted to Shadow. "But that dog, he won't make it through winter." Jamal finally spoke, his voice sharp with old wounds. "You're too old for this, Dad. You can't start over in a wreck like that." Loretta's hand tightened on Shadow's collar. "We're not starting over," she said, her voice rising like a gospel crescendo. "We're holding on to what matters." Shadow whimpered, pressing closer, his warmth a quiet promise against the coldness of their children's words. Clarence started the truck, the engine sputtering like his own weary heart. "We'll go where Shadow goes," he declared, pulling away from the house that held their memories. The baptisms, the Sunday dinners, the laughter now drowned by rain. The drive to Thorn's Rest was a blur of wet asphalt and heavy silence. Loretta clutched a small bag with their last $1,000, a few cans of beans, and her blood pressure pills, her fingers tracing the worn edges as if seeking solace. Shadow, curled between them, seemed to sense the weight of their journey, his steady breathing a contrast to their turmoil. Clarence's mind churned with images of his children's faces, once bright with dreams he'd nurtured, now hardened by ambition. He thought of Elijah, his grandfather, who'd worked the mines under the shadow of segregation, leaving behind whispers of a hidden legacy in these mountains. As they climbed the winding roads of the Blackthorn Mountains, the rain eased, but a chill settled in. The truck's headlights caught a faded sign, Thorn's Rest. The name promised refuge, but the reality was a slap. The cabin emerged from the dusk, a skeletal ruin under a blood-red sky. Its roof sagged, holes gaping like open wounds. Shattered windows stared blankly, and the porch leaned as if ready to collapse. Clarence parked, his hands shaking not from cold, but from the realization that this was their new beginning, a mockery of the rest they deserved at 75. Loretta's breath hitched, her eyes scanning the desolation. "This is what they gave us," she whispered, her voice cracking. Shadow stirred, his nose twitching as if scenting something beyond the decay. Clarence reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, calloused and worn but unyielding. "We've faced worse," he said, though doubt gnawed at him. "We'll make it ours, Loretta. For us, for Shadow." She nodded, her lips trembling into a faint smile. "Like the old hymn says, 'Let my people go.' We're free to choose our path." Shadow's tail thumped softly, a quiet vow of loyalty. They stepped out into the dusk, the cabin looming like a challenge, its broken frame a mirror to their fractured family. Yet in the silence, a spark of defiance flickered. Clarence and Loretta, at the edge of despair, refused to break. The rain had stopped, but a bone-deep chill clung to the air as Clarence and Loretta Washington sat on the splintered porch of the Thorn's Rest cabin, its sagging boards creaking under their weight. The dusk painted the sky in hues of blood and ash, casting long shadows that seemed to mock their plight. At 75, they should have been surrounded by the warmth of family, not this forsaken ruin. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, pressed between them, his warm fur a fragile shield against the despair that threatened to swallow them whole. Clarence's gnarled hands, worn from years tending Alabama gardens, rested on his knees, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of betrayal. Loretta's fingers, once nimble on piano keys, clutched Shadow's collar, her breath uneven from the strain of her high blood pressure. Clarence stared at the cabin's broken facade, its shattered windows like empty eyes staring back. "This is our legacy," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, thick with anguish. 50 years of love, sacrifice, and gospel Sundays, and we're left with this? His mind replayed the faces of Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal, his children, now strangers who'd traded their parents' home for a nursing home pamphlet. The memory of their cold dismissal burned hotter than the mountain wind. He thought of the nights he'd sung "Go Down Moses" in church, his voice lifting prayers for their future. only to be cast aside at the age when he needed them most. Loretta's eyes, clouded with unshed tears, traced the horizon where the Blackthorn Mountains loomed like silent judges. "We gave them everything," she whispered, her voice cracking like brittle glass. "Our savings, our home, our dreams. And they gave us a key to a grave." She leaned into Shadow, his warmth grounding her as her heart raced, not just from illness, but from the raw wound of abandonment. She began to hum, "Nobody knows the trouble I've seen," the gospel hymn rising softly, a lament from her days leading the church choir. Each note was a plea, a thread of faith fraying under the weight of their reality. "Nobody knows but Jesus," she sang, her voice trembling, tears spilling down her weathered cheeks. Shadow whimpered, nuzzling her hand, his golden eyes reflecting a loyalty that outshone their children's betrayal. The cabin's decay seemed to echo their shattered hopes. The roof gaped open, exposing beams like broken bones. The porch sagged, threatening to collapse under their grief. Clarence reached for Loretta's hand, their fingers interlocking, a lifeline against the void. "We're too old for this," he said, his voice hoarse. "At 75, we should be rocking on our porch, not sitting on one that's falling apart." The words carried the weight of a lifetime, decades of double shifts, skipped meals, and prayers for their children's success in a world that often shut doors on their kind. Loretta's hum faltered, her gaze dropping to Shadow. "He's all we have left," she said, stroking his fur. "Our kids chose their world over us, but Shadow never will." As if stirred by her words, Shadow's ears perked up, his nose twitching against the damp air. He rose, his old joints creaking, and let out a sharp bark that cut through the silence. Clarence frowned, watching as the dog padded to a corner of the yard, where overgrown weeds tangled with rusted debris. Shadow's paws dug frantically, dirt flying, until a dull glint emerged. A tin box etched with E. Washington, 1945. Loretta's breath caught, her heart skipping not from illness, but from a spark of curiosity. "What's he found?" she asked, her voice lifting slightly, the first hint of hope piercing her despair. Clarence knelt beside Shadow, his knees protesting as he pried open the box. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact, alongside a few gardening tools, a trowel, a pruning knife, etched with the same initials. The journal belonged to Elijah, Clarence's grandfather, a man who'd toiled in the mines under the shadow of segregation. Clarence's fingers trembled as he opened it, Loretta leaning close, her scarf brushing his shoulder. The first page read, "Thorn's Rest holds a treasure hidden in stone. Only the broken find it." A crude map, inked in faded lines, pointed to a spot deep in the mountains. Shadow barked again, his eyes fixed on a path winding through frost-dusted pines. He trotted forward, pausing to glance back, as if urging them to follow. Clarence hesitated, the weight of their situation pressing down. "He's trying to tell us something," Loretta said, her voice steadier now, the hymn's echo still lingering in her throat. She stood, clutching her bag of meager possessions, $1,000, canned beans, her pills, and took Clarence's arm. "If Shadow believes there's something out there, I trust him more than I trust our kids right now." The path was treacherous, roots snagging their feet, the cold biting through their thin coats. Shadow led with purpose, his tail high despite his age, as if guided by an unseen force. Clarence's heart pounded, not just from the climb, but from a flicker of something he hadn't felt since their children's betrayal. Possibility. Loretta's breath came easier, her eyes bright with a mix of fear and anticipation. The path opened to a narrow gorge, where a crystal-clear lake shimmered under the fading light. Lake Serenity, as Elijah's journal named it, lay cradled by stone, its surface untouched by the wind. Loretta knelt, her fingers dipping into the water. A faint mineral scent, magnesium, salt, rose, and a warmth not of heat but of calm spread through her chest. Her racing heart slowed, her mind clearing like fog lifting from the mountains. "It's like peace," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. Clarence read from Elijah's journal, his voice thick with emotion. "Lake Serenity soothes the heart and soul. I found it, fleeing hatred, a gift for the broken. The words felt like a message across generations, as if Elijah, who'd faced his own battles, had left this for them. Shadow sat by the lake, his gaze steady, as if he'd known this place all along. Clarence looked at Loretta, her face softened by a fragile hope. "Maybe this is why we're here," he said, his voice catching. "Not to die, but to find something." Loretta nodded, her tears now of wonder, not grief. Like the hymn says, "Nobody knows but Jesus. Maybe he sent Shadow to show us." The dog's tail thumped, a quiet promise that their story wasn't over. In that moment, under the dying light, the despair that had gripped them on the porch began to crack, a faint light breaking through. The dawn broke over Thorn's rest, its pale light filtering through the pines, casting a soft glow on the jagged edges of Clarence and Loretta Washington's new reality. The sting of their children's betrayal lingered, but the discovery of Lake Serenity had kindled a fragile spark in their hearts. At 75, they should have been cradled by family, not wrestling with a rotting cabin. Yet as Clarence stood in the yard, his breath misting in the mountain chill, he felt a stirring he hadn't known since his youth, a defiance born of necessity. Loretta, her silver curls catching the sunrise, knelt beside their garden plot, her fingers trembling not from weakness, but from a rekindled purpose. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, paced nearby, his golden eyes alert, as if sensing a shift in their spirits. Clarence's hands, gnarled from decades tending Alabama gardens, gripped a pruning knife etched with E. Washington, a relic from his grandfather Elijah's tin box. The journal's words echoed in his mind, a treasure hidden in stone, meant for the broken. He didn't know if Lake Serenity was the end of their journey, but it was a beginning. "We can't live in a wreck," he said, his voice rough but resolute, as he surveyed the cabin's sagging frame. The roof's holes gaped like accusations, but he saw potential in the splintered wood. "We'll make it ours, Loretta. For us. For Shadow." His heart ached with the weight of their abandonment, yet the lake's calming touch lingered, urging him forward. Loretta rose, her scarf slipping to reveal a faint smile, the first since their children's cold farewell. "We've built before," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Once she'd taught children to sing, 'This Little Light of Mine,' in a classroom filled with hope, her music a beacon against a world that often dimmed their light. Now at 75, that same hope flickered in her chest, fueled by the lake's soothing waters. She whistled a few notes of the gospel hymn, soft and clear, and Shadow's ears perked up, his tail wagging as if answering a call. "He knows we're not done yet," she said, stroking his fur. Shadow's loyalty was a balm to her wounded heart, a reminder that love could outlast betrayal. They began with the roof, Clarence climbing a rickety ladder with a stubbornness that belied his age. He pried loose boards from a nearby abandoned shed, each one a testament to Elijah's era, when African-American hands carved lives from unyielding earth. His joints ached, but the pain was duller now, as if the lake's waters had softened his body's protests. He carved each plank with Elijah's knife, the blade's weight grounding him. "This is for you, old man," he muttered, imagining his grandfather's resilience in the face of segregation. The thought fueled his swings, each nail driven with the force of his refusal to surrender. Loretta, meanwhile, worked the garden plot, her fingers sinking into the cold soil. The lake's water, carried in a dented bucket, shimmered as she poured it over the earth. She planted collard greens and sweet potatoes, staples of her childhood, each seed a prayer for renewal. Her blood pressure, once a constant threat, felt steadier, her mind clearer. "It's like the lake singing to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with wonder. She whistled, "This little light of mine," again, and Shadow darted into the woods, returning with a coil of rope clutched in his jaws. His eyes gleamed with an uncanny intelligence, as if Elijah's spirit guided his steps. "Good boy," Loretta said, her heart swelling. Shadows finds a cracked window pane, a rusted hinge, a solar panel from an old outpost, seemed less like chance and more like destiny. The work was grueling, each task a battle against their aging bodies and the mountain's indifference. Clarence's knees buckled as he hauled wood, his breath ragged, but he pushed on, driven by the memory of their children's dismissal. "They thought we'd break," he said, hammering a board into place. But we're still standing. His anger had softened into determination, each swing of the hammer a declaration of survival. Loretta, mixing soil with lake water, felt her own resolve harden. "We're not just surviving," she said, her voice rising like a gospel refrain. "We're building something new." Shadow, ever vigilant, circled the yard, his bark sharp as he unearthed a buried nail or tugged a branch to the path they were carving to the lake. The stone path to Lake Serenity took shape, each rock laid with care, a testament to their refusal to be forgotten. Clarence's hands bled from the rough edges, but the pain felt like a badge of honor. Loretta, kneeling beside him, sang softly, her voice weaving through the pines. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine," she crooned, and Shadow's tail thumped in rhythm, as if the hymn called to him. The path wasn't just a route to the lake, it was a lifeline, connecting their broken past to a fragile future. The garden sprouted faster than expected, collards unfurling vibrant leaves, sweet potatoes swelling in the mineral-rich soil. Loretta's heart lifted, her breath deeper, as if the lake's waters were knitting her body back together. Clarence paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at Loretta. Her face, lined with years of worry, glowed with a quiet strength. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice catching. It wasn't just her face, it was her spirit, unyielding despite their children's betrayal. Loretta smiled, her eyes glistening. "You're not so bad yourself, old man," she teased, her humor a spark in the darkness. Shadow nudged her hand, his warmth a constant reminder of their bond. "He's our family," she said, her voice firm, "more than those who left us." The words stung, but they also freed her, a gospel truth cutting through the pain. As the sun dipped low, casting golden rays over the half-repaired cabin, Clarence felt a shift. The despair that had gripped them on the porch was fading, replaced by a stubborn hope. The cabin's frame stood straighter, the garden promised sustenance, and the path to the lake gleamed with purpose. Shadow sat by the garden, his gaze fixed on the mountains, as if guarding a secret only he understood. Clarence knelt beside him, his hand on the dog's fur. "You're leading us somewhere, aren't you?" he whispered. Shadow's tail thumped, a quiet vow. Loretta joined them, her whistle fading into a soft hum of "This little light of mine." The mountain air carried their song, a fragile anthem of resilience, as Thorn's rest began to whisper back. The morning sun spilled golden light across Thorn's rest, its warmth kissing the newly patched roof of Clarence and Loretta Washington's cabin, a fragile monument to their defiance. The stone path to Lake Serenity gleamed under dew, and the garden's collard greens swayed like a quiet hymn. At 75, Clarence and Loretta should have been basking in the embrace of family, not forging a new life from a mountain's ruins. Yet as Clarence stood in the yard, his weathered hands gripping a trowel etched with his grandfather Elijah's initials, he felt a pulse of pride where despair once reigned. Loretta, her silver curls catching the light, hummed softly as she tended the garden, her heart steadier than it had been in years. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, lay nearby, his golden eyes vigilant, as if guarding the fragile hope they'd cultivated. Clarence's chest swelled with a quiet triumph, the ache of his children's betrayal, Tyrone's cold pragmatism, Aisha's guilty silence, Jamal's lingering resentment softened by the cabin's transformation. "We're making something real here," he said, his voice low, resonant with the gospel cadence of his youth. He drove the trowel into the soil, planting another sweet potato, each root a defiance of the life his children had discarded. The lake's waters, with their strange mineral calm, had dulled his joint pain, but it was the act of building that healed his spirit. He glanced at Loretta, her hands deep in the earth, and saw the woman who'd sung through decades of struggle, her strength unbowed by age or abandonment. Loretta's hum grew into "Oh, Happy Day," the gospel hymn rising like a prayer from her days leading the church choir. Her blood pressure, once a constant shadow, felt lighter, as if the lake's waters had washed away years of worry. "This garden's singing back to us," she said, her voice warm with wonder. She looked at Shadow, his fur gleaming despite his age, and smiled. "You brought us here, didn't you, boy?" Shadow's tail thumped, his eyes glinting with an uncanny knowing, as if Elijah's spirit lingered in his steps. The dog had become more than a companion. He was a guide, his finds, glass panes, ropes, a solar panel, stitching their broken world together. Word of their sanctuary spread like a whisper through the pines, reaching a small African-American community in a town 30 miles down the mountain. The first visitor came at dusk, her footsteps soft on the stone path. Ruby, a seamstress in her late 60s, carried a basket of cornbread, her eyes heavy with grief. "Lost my boy 2 years ago," she said, her voice cracking like dry leaves. "Heard you've got something here that soothes the soul." Clarence's heart clenched, recognizing the pain of a parent abandoned by fate. Loretta, setting aside her gardening gloves, took Ruby's hand. "We know loss," she said, her voice a gentle echo of the hymns that had carried her through. "Come with us." Shadow rose, his movements spry for his 14 years, and led Ruby to Lake Serenity. His eyes locked on hers as if reading her sorrow, and he paused by the lake's edge, waiting. Ruby knelt, her fingers trailing in the water, the mineral scent, magnesium, salt, rising like a balm. After a moment, her shoulders softened, and she whispered, "It's like hearing his voice again." Tears fell, but they were softer now, not jagged with grief. Clarence watched, his throat tight, feeling a purpose he hadn't known since his gardening days. "This lake's a gift," he said, his voice thick. "It's not just for us." Ruby's cornbread, warm and crumbly, became their dinner, shared on the cabin's patch porch. "My mama taught me that recipe," Ruby said, her smile tentative but real. "It's all I have left of home." Loretta's eyes glistened, her hand resting on Shadow's head. "You're home here now," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of a Sunday service. The act of sharing food, of offering solace, stirred something deep in her, a memory of church suppers, of community binding wounds the world couldn't heal. At 75, she'd expected to fade, not to forge new bonds. Yet Ruby's presence felt like a promise, a seed taking root in their barren soil. Days later, Leon arrived, a retired pastor in his early 70s, his face lined with the weight of lost congregants. "Can't sleep," he admitted, his voice rough. "I failed my flock, left them when the church closed." Clarence saw his own guilt reflected, the fear of failing those who depended on him. Shadow, sensing Leon's unrest, led him to a second lake, smaller and tucked among aspens, its waters carrying a different mineral tang. Leon sat, dipping his hands and his eyes closed as if in prayer. "It's like the peace I preached about, but never felt," he said, his voice trembling with relief. He shared a story in the griot tradition, his words weaving a tale of his great-grandmother, a freedwoman who'd found solace in Alabama's rivers. "This place feels like her spirit," he said. Clarence and Loretta accepted no payment, only gifts. Collard greens from Leon, a quilt from Ruby, each offering a thread of community. "We're not alone anymore," Loretta said, her voice rising like a gospel crescendo. She whistled, "Oh, happy day," and Shadow's ears perked, his tail wagging as if joining the song. Clarence's heart swelled. The betrayal of their children, Tyrone's ambition, Aisha's shame, Jamal's anger, fading against the warmth of this new family. "At 75, I thought our purpose was gone," he said, his hand on Loretta's shoulder. "But we're planting more than greens here." Ruby and Leon returned, bringing others, a nurse, a barber, each carrying their own burdens. Shadow greeted them, his golden eyes assessing, leading each to the lake that suited their pain. The cabin, once a symbol of abandonment, now hummed with life, its porch a gathering place for shared stories and soul food. Loretta's whistle filled the air, her music a beacon for the broken. Clarence watched, his chest tight with pride, not pain. "This is what Elijah meant," he said, clutching the journal. "A treasure for the broken." Shadow lay at his feet, his presence a quiet vow that Thorn's rest was becoming more than a refuge. It was a home. The afternoon sun bathed Thorn's rest in a warm amber glow, glinting off the stone path that wound from the cabin to the shimmering waters of Lake Serenity. The garden's collard greens rustled softly, a testament to Clarence and Loretta Washington's stubborn resilience. At 75, they should have been surrounded by the laughter of grandchildren, not the echoes of a community they'd built from nothing. Yet as Clarence polished a gardening trowel etched with his grandfather Elijah's initials, a flicker of pride warmed his chest. Loretta, her silver curls loose under a faded scarf, hummed "Oh Happy Day" softly, her voice a beacon of the hope they'd nurtured. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, lay on the porch, his golden eyes watchful, as if sensing a shift in the mountain air. The rumble of an engine broke the stillness, a sleek SUV cresting the ridge. Clarence's hand froze, the trowel heavy in his grip. Loretta's hum faltered, her heart stuttering, not from her blood pressure, but from the weight of recognition. Their children, Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal, stepped out, their polished shoes jarring against the rough earth of Thorn's Rest. Tyrone, 48, his suit crisp despite the mountain dust, carried the arrogance of a financial director masking financial stress. Aisha, 45, clutched a satchel, her journalist's eyes clouded with guilt she couldn't hide. Jamal, 42, stood rigid, his engineer's precision barely concealing old resentment from Clarence's disapproval of his marriage years ago. The sight of them reopened wounds Clarence and Loretta had fought to heal, their betrayal a raw scar at 75. "What are you doing here?" Clarence asked, his voice low, edged with the gravel of suppressed anger. He stood, his frame stooped but unyielding, the memory of their cold dismissal, pushing a nursing home pamphlet, rejecting Shadow, burning in his chest. "You left us to rot. Now you show up to see the wreckage?" His words cut like the pruning knife he held, each syllable heavy with the pain of their abandoned years. Tyrone's jaw tightened, his pride stung. "We heard about this place," he said, gesturing to the cabin, now sturdy with patched walls and a thriving garden. "You've turned a ruin into something else. We thought you'd be broken by now." Loretta stepped forward, her scarf slipping, revealing eyes that shimmered with hurt and defiance. "Broken?" she said, her voice rising like a gospel refrain. "At 75, we deserved your care, not your abandonment. We built this with our hands, our hearts, and Shadow's loyalty." She stroked the dog's fur, his warmth anchoring her against the surge of grief. Shadow's eyes locked on the children, his gaze steady, as if judging their intentions. Aisha's face crumpled, her guilt breaking through. "I wrote that article," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Called you outdated, said you held me back. I was wrong, Mama." Her admission hung in the air, a fragile thread of remorse. Jamal shifted, his resentment flaring. "You never believed in me, Dad," he said, his voice sharp. "Told me my marriage was a mistake. Now you expect us to applaud this?" He gestured to the cabin, his eyes narrowing. Clarence's heart clenched, the old argument a wound that hadn't healed. "I wanted you to be strong," he said, his voice cracking, "like Elijah, who fought for us in a world that didn't care. I was wrong to push you away, but you pushed us out of your lives." The words were a reckoning, heavy with the weight of a father's love and failure. Aisha reached into her satchel, pulling out a yellowed letter, her hands trembling. "I found this in Elijah's old papers," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He wrote that you and Mama refused to sell the family land to developers, even when it could have made you rich. You chose our future over yours." Loretta's breath caught, her hand tightening on Shadow's collar. The letter was a revelation, a testament to their sacrifices, savings drained, dreams deferred, all for their children. Tyrone's eyes softened, his arrogance faltering. "We didn't know," he said, his voice low. "We thought you were just stubborn." Tyrone's suggestion came next, tentative but laced with his old ambition. "This place could be a retreat," he said, glancing at the garden, the path. "A small business to support you. People would pay for what you've built." Clarence's anger flared, his hand gripping the trowel. "This isn't for profit," he snapped. "It's for healing. For us, for Ruby, for Leon. People you don't know, who've shown us more care than you." Loretta's eyes burned with the same fire. "You left us at 75 to die in a nursing home," she said. "Shadow stayed. This lake stayed, not your money." Shadow, sensing the tension, rose and padded toward Lake Serenity, his tail high, as if beckoning them to follow. Loretta nodded, her heart pounding but steady. "Come see what we've found," she said, her voice softer now, a gospel note of hope threading through. The family followed, the path's stones crunching underfoot. At the lake, Tyrone knelt, dipping his hands into the cool water, his shoulders easing as the mineral scent calmed his racing pulse. "It's like the stress is gone," he whispered, his arrogance melting. Aisha tried the second lake, tucked among aspens, her chronic back pain easing. "I haven't felt this in years," she said, tears brimming. Jamal knelt beside Shadow, his resentment softening as he stroked the dog's fur. "We were wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "We thought you couldn't do this, not at your age." Shadow's golden eyes met his, steady and forgiving, as if Elijah's spirit spoke through them. Loretta whistled, "Oh, happy day," the hymn rising like a bridge between their fractured past and a tentative future. Clarence watched, his heart torn between hurt and hope. "You're here now," he said, his voice thick. "But trust is earned, not given." The lake's waters shimmered, reflecting their faces, parents and children, bound by pain but reaching for redemption. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over Thorn's Rest. The cabin stood proud, a testament to their survival, but the family's presence stirred a fragile hope. Loretta's whistle faded, her eyes on her children. "We built this without you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "If you stay, it's for this place, not for profit." Tyrone nodded, his pride humbled. Aisha clutched Elijah's letter, her guilt a weight she vowed to carry. Jamal's hand lingered on Shadow, a silent promise to rebuild. The mountain air carried the hymn's echo, a whisper of healing, as Thorn's Rest held its breath for what came next. The twilight air at Thorn's Rest hung heavy with the scent of collard greens and damp earth, the cabin's sturdy walls glowing faintly under the fading sun. The stone path to Lake Serenity shimmered with evening dew, a quiet testament to Clarence and Loretta Washington's refusal to break. At 75, they should have been cradled by family, not forging bonds with a fledgling community while facing their children's tentative remorse. Clarence stood in the yard, his hands weathered from years of gardening, clutching Elijah's trowel, its weight grounding his fragile hope. Loretta, her silver curls catching the last light, leaned against the porch, her heart steadier, but her eyes wary as she watched Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal linger nearby. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, paced restlessly, his golden eyes scanning the horizon, as if sensing a storm beyond the calm. The children's return had cracked open old wounds, their guilt, stirred by Elijah's letter revealing their parents' sacrifices, still raw. Tyrone's arrogance had softened, but his eyes betrayed lingering ambition. Aisha's shame over her critical article weighed heavily, her hands clutching the letter like a lifeline. Jamal's resentment, born of Clarence's past disapproval, flickered but hadn't faded. Clarence felt the tension, a knot in his chest tighter than his aching joints. "You're here," he said, his voice low, rough with guarded hope. "But trust is a long road." Loretta nodded, her fingers tracing Shadow's fur. "We built this without you," she said, her voice carrying the gospel cadence of her teaching days. "If you stay, it's for healing, not for gain." Before Tyrone could respond, a distant rumble shook the mountain, like the growl of an angry god. Shadow's ears shot up, his bark sharp, urgent. The sky darkened, clouds swelling with menace. Clarence's heart lurched, not from age but from instinct honed by years in Alabama's unpredictable fields. "Rain's coming," he said, his voice tight. But this was no ordinary rain. A torrent roared down the Blackthorn slopes, a flash flood churning mud and debris. Water surged toward the garden, threatening to drown the collards and sweet potatoes Loretta had nurtured. Worse, it rushed toward the cabin, lapping at the porch, and toward Lake Serenity, where a massive boulder teetered, ready to choke the lake's sacred waters. The tin box holding Elijah's journal, left on a shelf inside, wobbled as water seeped through the floor. Loretta's breath caught, her hand gripping Shadow's collar. "Not our home," she whispered, her voice breaking. At 75, she'd faced loss before, her parents, her dreams, her children's loyalty. But this felt like a final blow. Shadow bolted forward, barking fiercely, his old legs moving with uncanny vigor. He darted to the garden, then the cabin, then the lake, his eyes blazing as if Elijah's spirit drove him. "He's showing us," Clarence said, his voice trembling with awe. He grabbed a shovel, his joints screaming, but his resolve unyielding. "We save what we've built." Tyrone hesitated, his suit soaked, his pride warring with guilt. "We can't stop this," he said, but his voice faltered as Shadow's barks pierced the roar of the flood. Aisha, her satchel abandoned, grabbed a rake, her journalist detachment crumbling. "We owe them this," she said, her voice thick with shame. Jamal, his resentment burning out, seized a rope from Shadow's earlier finds. "Let's move," he said, his engineer's precision kicking in. Loretta, her scarf slipping, joined them, her heart pounding, but fueled by a fire she hadn't felt since her choir days. "We're not losing this," she said, her voice rising like a gospel shout. Shadow led the charge, his barks guiding them through the chaos. At the garden, Clarence and Jamal dug a shallow trench, redirecting water away from the collards. Mud clung to their hands, the rain blinding, but Clarence's heart surged with purpose. "This is our legacy," he grunted, his shovel striking earth. Aisha raked debris, her tears mixing with rain, each motion a silent apology for her words that had wounded her parents. Tyrone, abandoning his suit jacket, hauled branches to reinforce the trench, his arrogance washed away by the flood's fury. Loretta, her breath ragged, carried buckets of soil, her strength defying her 75 years. The real danger loomed at Lake Serenity. Shadow raced ahead, circling the teetering boulder, his barks frantic as water churned below. If it fell, the lake, their salvation, would be lost. Clarence's heart raced, the memory of Elijah's words in the journal, a gift for the broken, spurring him on. Jamal looped the rope around the boulder, his hands steady despite the past rift with his father. "Together," he said, meeting Clarence's eyes. They pulled, muscles straining, as Tyrone and Aisha braced the rock. Shadow stood firm, his gaze locked on the lake, as if channeling Elijah's spirit to guide them. The boulder shifted, settling safely away from the water's edge. As the flood receded, the cabin stood firm, the garden spared, the lake untouched. The tin box, soggy but intact, held Elijah's journal, a symbol of their survival. Clarence sank to his knees, exhaustion mingling with triumph. "We did it," he whispered, his voice cracking. Loretta knelt beside him, her hand on Shadow's head. "Not just us," she said, her voice a gospel hum. "Shadow knew." She began to sing "Wade in the Water," the hymn rising like a prayer, its rhythm echoing their shared struggle. Tyrone, his suit ruined, joined her, his voice hesitant but sincere. Aisha and Jamal followed, their voices blending, a fragile harmony mending years of silence. They gathered on the porch, sharing cornbread from Ruby's earlier gift, the warmth of soul food cutting through the chill. Tyrone's eyes glistened, his pride broken. "We thought you couldn't do this at 75, he said, his voice raw. "We were wrong." Aisha clutched Elijah's letter, her guilt a weight she now embraced. "We didn't see your strength," she said. Jamal, his resentment gone, touched Clarence's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, his voice thick. Clarence's heart softened, but he held firm. "You're here now," he said, "but this place is for healing, not taking." Loretta's song faded, her eyes on Shadow, who lay content, his golden eyes reflecting the stars. The flood had tested them, but it had also bound them, a family reborn in the mountain's embrace. The morning after the flood, Thorn's Rest stood resilient, its stone path glistening with leftover rain, the garden's collard greens defiant against the mud. The cabin's walls, patched with love and grit, held firm, a testament to Clarence and Loretta Washington's unyielding spirit. At 75, they should have been resting in the warmth of family, not binding a fractured one with strangers who'd become kin. Clarence stood on the porch, his weathered hands clutching Elijah's journal, its pages still damp but intact, a beacon of their survival. Loretta, her silver curls catching the dawn's light, sat beside him, her heart steady, her eyes alight with a purpose she hadn't felt since her choir days. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, lay at their feet, his golden eyes calm yet watchful, as if guarding the fragile unity forged in the flood's chaos. The air carried the faint echo of "Wade in the Water," sung during the deluge, a gospel thread weaving their family back together. Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal lingered in the yard, their faces softened by guilt and awe. The flood had stripped away Tyrone's arrogance, Aisha's shame, and Jamal's resentment, leaving raw vulnerability. Clarence's chest tightened, not from his aching joints but from the weight of their presence. Children who'd once abandoned them now stood on the land they'd reclaimed. "You saved this place with us," he said, his voice rough but warm, the gospel cadence of his youth softening the edges. "But what now? You came for what we built, not for us." Tyrone, his suit still stained from mud, stepped forward, his pride humbled. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought you were too old, that you'd break at 75. But this," he gestured to the cabin, the garden, the path to Lake Serenity. "This is stronger than anything I've built." His eyes, once cold, glistened with regret. As a financial director, he'd chased success to prove himself in a world that demanded twice as much from a black man, but he'd lost his parents in the process. "I want to help, not take," he said, his voice raw. "For you, for Elijah's legacy." Aisha clutched Elijah's letter, the one revealing her parents' sacrifice, refusing to sell family land to secure their children's futures. Her journalist's armor had cracked, her guilt a weight she couldn't shake. "I wrote lies about you," she said, her voice trembling. "Called you outdated, said you held me back, but you gave up everything for us." Tears spilled, her hands shaking as she met Loretta's eyes. "I want to tell your story now, Mama, the real one." Jamal, his resentment over Clarence's past disapproval fading, nodded. "I was angry," he admitted, his engineer's precision giving way to vulnerability. "But you fought for us, Dad, even when I pushed you away. I want to fight for this place." Loretta's heart swelled, her breath steady despite her age. The flood had washed away not just mud but years of silence. She rose, her scarf slipping, and touched Aisha's cheek. "You're here now," she said, her voice a gospel hum, soft yet unyielding. "But this isn't about fixing the past. It's about building something new." Shadow stirred, his tail thumping, as if sensing the shift. His golden eyes, flecked with an uncanny wisdom, seemed to carry Elijah's spirit, urging them toward a greater purpose. Clarence opened the journal, his fingers tracing the faded ink. "Elijah wrote of a treasure for the broken," he said. "This place, Lake Serenity, this cabin, it's for those who need healing, like us, like Ruby and Leon." The idea came from Tyrone, his voice tentative but earnest. "A foundation," he said, "Thorn's Rest Foundation, to help elderly black folks like you, abandoned, forgotten. I'll fund it from my bank, no strings." His eyes met Clarence's, a silent plea for forgiveness. Aisha nodded, her journalist's fire reignited. "I'll document it," she said, "like the griot stories Grandpa Elijah loved, to keep this place alive for those who need it." Jamal, his hands calloused from the flood's labor, added, "I'll secure the land, make sure no developer touches it. This is our family's legacy." Clarence's throat tightened, pride battling doubt. At 75, he'd expected to fade, not to lead a cause. Yet the lake's calm, the community's warmth, and Shadow's loyalty stirred a fire he thought long extinguished. Ruby and Leon arrived, their footsteps soft on the path. Ruby, the seamstress who'd lost her son, carried a quilt stitched with memories of him, her eyes brighter since the lake's touch. "This place gave me peace," she said, her voice soft but strong. "I want to help others find it." Leon, the retired pastor, brought a pot of collard greens, his griot tales of freed ancestors echoing Elijah's words. "This is sacred ground," he said, his voice resonant. "Like the rivers our people crossed to freedom." Their stories, woven with loss and hope, mirrored Clarence and Loretta's, binding them as kin. Shadow greeted them, his nose brushing Ruby's hand, as if affirming their place in this growing family. They gathered inside the cabin, the air thick with the scent of soul food and shared dreams. Loretta proposed the Foundation's mission, to offer Lake Serenity's healing to elderly African Americans, those cast aside like they were. "At 75, we thought our purpose was gone," she said, her voice rising like a choir's crescendo. But God and Shadow showed us otherwise. She whistled, "Oh, happy day," the hymn filling the room, and Ruby joined, her voice blending in harmony. Clarence's eyes glistened, his hand on Elijah's journal. "This is what he meant," he said. "A treasure for the broken, for us, for them." Shadow's tail thumped, his golden eyes steady, as if Elijah's spirit nodded in approval. Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal listened, their guilt giving way to resolve. "We'll make it right," Tyrone said, his voice firm. "Not just for you, but for every elder who's been left behind." Aisha's pen scratched, capturing the moment in griot style, her words a vow to honor her parents' story. Jamal sketched a plan to protect the land, his engineer's mind alight with purpose. Ruby and Leon pledged to spread the word, their presence a bridge to the community below. Clarence looked at Loretta, her face radiant with pride, and felt their 50 years of love renewed. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice thick. The cabin, once a ruin, now hummed with life, a sanctuary born from their pain. The evening sun draped Thorn's rest in a golden veil, its rays dancing on the stone path that wound to Lake Serenity, where the waters shimmered with quiet promise. The cabin, once a crumbling ruin, stood proud, its walls a testament to Clarence and Loretta Washington's unyielding spirit. At 75, they should have been basking in the twilight of a life well lived, surrounded by grandchildren, not weaving a new legacy from the ashes of betrayal. Clarence sat on the porch, his weathered hands resting on Elijah's journal, its pages a bridge to his grandfather's strength. Loretta, her silver curls glowing under the fading light, leaned against him, her heart steady, her eyes radiant with a peace hard won. Shadow, their 14-year-old Labrador, lay at their feet, his golden eyes serene yet vigilant, as if guarding the sanctuary they'd built. The air carried the faint echo of "Oh, Happy Day," sung during their gathering with the community, a gospel thread tying their fractured family to the new kin they'd found in Ruby and Leon. The Thorn's Rest Foundation, born of their children's remorse and their own resilience, had given purpose to their pain. Tyrone, Aisha, and Jamal had stayed, their guilt, stirred by Elijah's letter revealing their parents' sacrifices, transformed into commitment. Clarence's chest swelled with a quiet pride, not for the cabin's sturdy walls or the garden's collared greens, but for the love that had endured. Loretta's hand found his, her touch a lifeline through decades of struggle. "We made it, Clarence," she whispered, her voice a gospel hum, rich with triumph. "At 75, we didn't just survive, we thrived." Shadow's ears twitched, his nose lifting as if scenting something beyond the evening breeze. He rose, his old joints moving with a vigor that belied his age, and let out a soft bark, sharp and insistent. Clarence frowned, his heart quickening with a familiar stir, the same instinct that had guided them through the flood. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his voice thick with curiosity. Shadow padded toward Lake Serenity, pausing to glance back, his golden eyes glinting with an uncanny wisdom, as if Elijah's spirit beckoned. Loretta's breath caught, her hand tightening on Clarence's. "He's found something again," she said, her voice trembling with awe. The memory of Shadow's earlier discoveries, Elijah's tin box, the lake itself, stirring her soul. They followed the path's stones familiar under their feet, the community trailing behind. Ruby, the seamstress whose grief had softened at the lake, carried a quilt stitched with her son's memory, her eyes bright with hope. Leon, the retired pastor, clutched a pot of collard greens, his griot tales of freed ancestors echoing in his steps. Tyrone, his arrogance shed, walked beside Aisha, whose pen had captured their story in griot style. Jamal, his resentment healed, kept pace, his engineer's mind already sketching plans to protect this sacred ground. The lake glimmered ahead, its waters a mirror to their shared journey. Shadow stopped at the edge, his bark softening to a low whine, his gaze fixed on a patch of reeds. There, half hidden in the dusk, was a pup, barely 6 months old, its golden fur a mirror of shadows, its eyes wide with fear and recognition. The pup whimpered, inching toward Shadow, who stood tall, as if passing a mantle. Clarence's heart lurched, not from his aging body, but from a surge of wonder. Another guardian, he whispered, his voice cracking. Loretta knelt, her hands trembling as she reached for the pup, who nuzzled her palm, its warmth a promise of continuity. Elijah wrote the lake would call a new protector, she said, her voice thick with tears. This is his heir. Shadow's tail thumped, his eyes meeting the pup's, a silent vow across generations. The community gathered, their faces lit by the sunset's glow. Ruby's quilt draped over her shoulders, a tapestry of loss and healing. This place gave me back my son's memory, she said, her voice soft but strong. Now it's giving us a future. Leon set down his greens, his griot voice rising. Our ancestors crossed rivers for freedom. This pup, like Shadow, is our river now. His words wove a story of resilience, echoing Elijah's journal, which spoke of treasures for the broken. Tyrone, his pride replaced by humility, said, I'll fund homes for elders here, so no one's abandoned like you were. Aisha's pen scratched, capturing the pup's arrival in griot style, her guilt now afire to honor her parents. Jamal, his hand on Clarence's shoulder, said, I'll build to protect this land, Dad. For you, for Elijah. Clarence's eyes glistened, his hand clutching the journal. At 75, he'd expected to fade, not to stand at the heart of a sanctuary. We thought our story was over, he said, his voice a gospel rumble, but Thorn's rest gave us a new song. Loretta, her heart full, began to sing, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the hymn rising like a prayer from her choir days. The community joined, their voices blending, Ruby's soft alto, Leon's deep bass, Tyrone's hesitant baritone, Aisha's clear soprano, Jamal's steady tenor. Shadow sat beside the pup, his golden eyes serene, as if Elijah's spirit sang with them. The cabin, the garden, the lakes, all glowed under the sunset, a dream home born from despair. Loretta's song faded, her hand on the pup, who curled against Shadow. You led us here, boy, she whispered, her voice trembling with love. And now you brought us family. Clarence looked at his children, their faces no longer strangers, but kin, bound by the mountain's grace. At 75, we didn't just find a home, he said, his voice thick. We found our purpose. The community's voices rose again, the hymn carrying through the pines, a testament to their shared healing. Thorn's Rest, once a ruin, stood as a beacon, its golden light promising refuge for all who were broken. As the golden sunset fades over Thorn's Rest, Clarence and Loretta's journey, from betrayal to triumph, sings like a gospel hymn, echoing resilience and love. Their story, woven with Shadow's loyalty and the community's embrace, reminds us that even at 75, purpose can rise from pain. What did their defiance stir in you? Did the strains of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or Elijah's legacy spark a memory of your own family's strength? Share your thoughts. Your stories are the threads that bind us, like collard greens shared at a Sunday table. Thank you for walking this mountain path with us, for feeling the weight of their struggle and the warmth of their victory. Until we meet again, may you find your own Lake Serenity, a place to heal and dream. Keep singing your story, and we'll gather soon for another tale of heart and hope.